This broadcast is being recorded tonight. I want to welcome you all. My name is Mary Earls, and on behalf of Unity Books, I am so happy that you are with us for the third and final webinar in our Summer of Self-Discovery reading series, featuring Native Soul by J Douglas Bottorff, or Doug as he likes to be called. Before I introduce the author, I need to tell you about the format for this webinar. Doug will speak for approximately 35 minutes, sharing key points from the book and some personal observations. Following the presentation, we'll move to questions and answers, including questions that have been submitted by our Goodreads discussion group. Please note that audience members will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have a question for Doug, please write it down at any time and send it using the chat box on your screen. Questions will be answered in the order they are submitted. And as I mentioned to you, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording following the session. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter. J Douglas Bottorff was ordained as a Unity minister in 1981. He is the author of A Practical Guide to Meditation and Prayer, A Practical Guide to Prosperous Living, The Whisper of Pialagos, and Native Soul, Unlocking Your Life's Potential. Doug is also a contributing author to John Marks Templeton's Laws of Living. Over the years, he's written extensively for Unity Magazine and numerous other Unity publications. He has served as a minister to churches in Michigan, Missouri, and Colorado. He's currently the minister of Unity Church in Grand Junction, Colorado, and serves as an independent Unity minister. Here is Doug Bottorff.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to everyone that's here listening. This is an interesting way to present because I know you're out there, but I can't see you. I know you can hear me, and I will be getting some of your questions later, but it is a privilege to be able to use this type of format and to present, to be one of the authors selected to present the material in Native Soul, which is embodies a lot of concepts that are very important to me. So I hope we can cover all of those tonight. What I would like to do is focus on 4 of the chapters. It's just impossible to cover the entire book, and it's even impossible to cover all the material in all of these chapters. But what I think this will present is a picture of the entire book, of the essence of the book. And we'll start with Chapter 1, Fulfillment is Closer Than You Think. Chapter 2 is The Personality Factor. Chapter 4, Your Creative Imagination. And we'll skip over to Chapter 8, An Evolution of Values. And what I would like to do, first of all, is give a little background on why I wrote this book. I've been a minister for over 30 years now, and I have had a lot of conversations with people on the spiritual path. And I hear and have thought about very extensively the process of spiritual unfoldment. So I've come to the realization that many on the spiritual path are hindered by 2 false beliefs. And these might seem a little strange at first, but I'll explain them as we go. The first is that we trace dissatisfaction to our limited understanding of God. So we believe that studying and reading more about God will bring satisfaction. We're taking an intellectual approach to our hoped-for spiritual development. And that seems perfectly logical, but there's a problem with it, and I'll get into that. The second issue is that we believe that our soul in its current condition is incomplete. The soul is evolving, we think. And I would like to present the idea that the soul is already complete, that it is already evolved, that we're simply waking up to that. Neither of these beliefs is true. This is the perspective that I'm coming from in Native Soul. Gaining more information about God, that is, reading books and so on, will not bring the kind of spiritual satisfaction that we crave. And I'm not going to discount reading. I'm just saying that the reasons that we read, we should look at this, because it will not bring the kind of spiritual satisfaction that we crave. If it did, we would probably already be spiritually satisfied, and we wouldn't need to read the next book. Our soul is complete right now. Experiencing this completeness is the only action that will evolve our spiritual awareness. It's not reading about it, it's experiencing it, and the experience is accessible to every one of us. That's what this whole thing is about. So here's a balancing attitude. It's an affirmation, a couple of affirmations here that you can put on your mirror or whatever. Just a reminder of what I believe is true about every soul. My completed soul is now radiating the full light of God. I am conscious of this light. And just kind of develop that as a vision of yourself. My completed soul is now radiating the full light of God. I am conscious of this light. Okay. Fulfillment is closer than you think. This is part 1, chapter 1. Over the years, I have developed a very deep interest in the research that is going on in the field of near-death experience. And the basis of this research is, first of all, my interest, but over the years I've had several interviews with people that have had these experiences. I've read extensively the many cases of people that have been pronounced dead or simply have their vital signs have stopped, and they've had this incredible experience. And without going into great detail on this, what it tells me is there are 2 critical points that we can glean from this research. The first is the ability to experience an indescribable level of satisfaction not only exists in you right now, it is your very essence. And this essence is what I refer to as the native soul. So it's not a thing that is developed. It's a thing that when an individual has one of these near-death experiences, this completed self emerges. And it is light years ahead of where they feel they are on the conscious level. The second thing is material things are not needed to produce deep fulfillment. And this goes against most of everything we've been taught. Near-death experiencers suddenly find themselves in a state of having absolutely nothing, not even a body. And yet they report touching something so meaningful, so gratifying, that they cannot adequately put it into words. So whatever this is, this dimension is, this thing I'm calling the native soul, it exists right now in every one of us. The people that have these experiences are nothing special. They're average, normal, everyday kinds of people from every walk of life. Nothing new is acquired. This is the point I really want to make. The near-death experiencer does not suddenly acquire a new set of faculties or mental capabilities. The experience has the effect of peeling back, in a matter of moments, the varnish of a lifetime of false and misdirected beliefs. In other words, from the time they have this experience that they're pronounced dead or whatever their individual experience is, they don't read a whole bunch of books. They don't do a lot of study. They don't meditate all of a sudden. This self emerges, and it is far advanced, further advanced than anything they can imagine. It's something they can't even imagine working toward, but it's already there, and that's the point I want to make. Beneath this veneer, the native soul is absolutely complete, whole, and immortal. We don't gain eternal life. We are eternal right now. We don't gain wholeness. At the soul level, we are whole. We are complete. This idea that you already have what you're looking for is very important on the spiritual path. There's a very different mindset between looking for something you own but have misplaced and looking for something that you're not sure you have. And I'll explain this with the parable of Jesus. What woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? The woman knows she has 10 coins and she loses one, and so she puts all of her energy into finding that coin. If she wasn't sure that she had 10, she wouldn't put in the same energy. And if you think about how most of us approach the spiritual path, we see the completed soul as something we do not yet have. And if we begin to make this transition in our thinking that we do have it, it's already complete, it's already present, we will begin to light a lamp, in a sense, and sweep the house of our own consciousness diligently until we find it. There's a very distinct difference in thinking you might have something and knowing that you have it. If you think of your native soul as something you already have and you've just forgotten you have it, you will approach finding it very differently than if you think of it as something that will require years to cultivate. And this, I believe, is where most people are. It will take years to cultivate this deeper dimension. And I think that's something that we need to take a new look at, and I hope this is what this book inspires. And what I'm going to do here is kind of use the personality interchangeably with words like ego and, well, self-image, just kind of a general definition of how we think of ourselves, distinct from what we are at the deepest level. So we're looking at the personality factor. Much like a fountain, the personality is your outlet, the avenue through which you manifest the innate qualities of your native soul. If you look at this fountain, you'll see that it's what is visible to us is the water that's flowing over the bowl, but we know that there is an unseen reservoir from which this water is being pumped. And the fountain simply represents the outlet of something deeper, something bigger, something we don't see, a deeper reality. And so the fountain allows this water to manifest where before we wouldn't see it. So it's like the personality, it's your outlet, it's the avenue through which you manifest the innate qualities of your native soul. So the personality is a good thing. It's not a thing to overcome. When properly understood, the personality itself is not a hindrance to be overcome, and this is again how most of us think of it. It is actually an important function of the soul. It allows you to personalize and communicate at the material level the universal energy that rises from your deepest level. So we often think of ourselves in two ways. We have this access to this deeper self, and the personality is a thing that we need to set aside, the ego or whatever. But the Greek word for I, capital I, is ego, and it's not a bad thing. It's like your mailbox. It's your personalized way of expressing the infinite. And so I think it's important for us to name the personality good. It is a good thing, and it is our means of expressing the deeper qualities of our being. When you hold a dim view of the role of personality, you're saying that there's a part of you that is broken, and you will not be spiritually whole until you fix or dispose of that part. When you deny or condemn your personality, you actually stymie your ability to express life on earth as it is in heaven. And what I would be willing to bet is most people will look at the personality and say, I'm not spiritually advanced because of the condition of my personality. We're naming the personality as a hindrance. and it is not a hindrance. It is the means through which we express ourselves on earth as it is in heaven. The word personality comes from the Latin word persona, whose original meaning was associated with the actor's mask. I think most of us have read this. We have heard this before. And I have discovered a little slightly different meaning to this, or a different spin on it that gave me a whole different way of thinking of it. The mask was not used to disguise, but to represent or typify a character. When the audience saw the mask, they knew they were to think of it not as a shield behind which the actor was hiding, and that's how most of us tend to think of personality, a shield behind which the actor is hiding, but as the character the mask represented. The mask was intended to convey the real essence of a given character. Nothing associated with deception was intended. So we have this image of an iceberg, and to me it's a very powerful image, because especially when we think of the native soul, we think of the totality of what we call an individual. And we inhabit two environments. I think most of us have probably come to accept this idea that we are in a three-dimensional and four-dimensional, or material realm and a spiritual realm. And if you look at this image of the iceberg, you'll see it does exactly the same thing. It's one thing inhabiting two realms, two dimensions. The personality is our interface with the material environment, and that's the tip of the iceberg, as we call it. And that's what we think of usually when we're thinking of the people that we meet. We see this personality and we evaluate it from the point of view of the personality, how that person sees themselves, the self-image that they carry. We don't see the deeper realm. And what's interesting about this, if you look at the graphic, the personality, will say, represents about 10% of the whole individual, whereas the native soul represents 90%. And I use these figures because this is what scientists tell us is true of the iceberg. When you see an iceberg, you're seeing about 10% of that chunk of ice above the water and about 90% below. But when we think of the human being, just think of yourself. Think of how much energy you put, how much time and energy you put in focusing on the personality, on the body, on the outer aspect. Probably spend 4% of our time thinking about and identifying with this 10%. And that is what gets us into trouble in terms of thinking that 90% is not yet developed. But when you look at this iceberg, that 90% is done. It's completely done. If you would take a great big saw and cut off that top 10%, what would happen? You would see another 10% rise up, because the reality of the individual, of that iceberg and the individual, remains intact, and it is complete. There is nothing lacking in this whole picture that we see here. It's just that we have two different functions. The personality is the interface to the material realm, but the native soul exists in its completeness always, eternally, in the spiritual realm. And this leads us to the creative imagination, which is a very good thing, but it can be the culprit. It's a wonderful instrument, and we'll take a look at this. Your creative imagination. And I love what Charles Fillmore wrote about the imagination. It's a definition that I think probably escapes most of us, because we think of the imagination usually in one way. But he wrote, in the communication of God with man, the imaging power of the mind plays an important part. It receives divine ideas and reflects their character to the consciousness. So it's twofold. It receives divine ideas and it reflects their character to the consciousness. The imagination has a twofold function. a receiver, and a reflector. The reflector, or the receiver, the receiving aspect of your imagination is your intuitive ability. And maybe you don't associate intuition with the imagination, but this is where I'm placing it. And I think this is what Charles Fillmore was referring to. The receiving aspect of your imagination is your intuitive ability, a portal capable of opening directly to the universal forces of the spiritual dimension. All living things possess this intuitive aspect of the imagination. In animals, we call this instinct. It's a natural connection with the bigger picture. They don't have to go to school to learn how to be whatever kind of animal they are. They know. It's an intuitive knowing. So they all have this receiving aspect. What's absent, or at least greatly restricted in the natural world, is the visioning aspect of the imagination. And this is an important thing that we're going to look at here. This visioning aspect allows us to develop a personal rather than a generic vision of ourselves and our life, an ability that has placed our species in a very unique position in nature. And we see this capability in a lot of things, which I'll get to in a moment. But just as a distinction, if you observe something like a herd of 100,000 wildebeest, you see that each one leads a very similar life. Their choices of food, habitat, and behavior are nearly identical throughout the herd. If you roll back the clock 1,000,000 years, you're likely to see the same basic wildebeest behavior. In other words, you don't see them using this visioning side of the imagination. They're not inventing computers and building cities and so forth. And that's what distinguishes the human. By contrast, you visit any town of 100,000 people, and you see countless economic, cultural, political, religious, and lifestyle distinctions. But you do not see in nature. You don't see this. You see in nature, you'll see a particular species, and though personality is involved in every single animal. If you have had dogs, cats, whatever, you know each one has a distinct personality, but they don't possess that envisioning side that we do, that sets us apart, that causes us to create cities and build cars and so forth. The imagination's ability to combine universal energy with personal imagery has lifted the human species far beyond the creative restrictions of basic instinct. And I have an example here that I think is very graphic. This is a photograph I took in 9 Mile Canyon in Utah. And we have these kinds of things all over the Southwest here, all over Colorado, all over Utah. It's fascinating evidence of ancient cultures that were here. But this is a very large panel on a canyon wall, and it's almost like an amphitheater. There's an area where the hunters, I assume, could gather and look at this panel. And what's interesting about this panel is, if, again, at first you look at it and you see some strange figures and so forth. You see obviously a couple of hunters there with their bows and arrows, and you see these the sheep, which are desert bighorn sheep. They're still around. This panel is probably at least 500 years old, maybe more, maybe out of the Fremont era. But the interesting thing that we see here are these two figures, and some of the scholars that look at these things see these as shaman figures. That is, the spiritual dimension is involved in this picture. And what else we see here is all of the sheep are moving toward the hunters, which you see over to your right. So that's an envisioning process, a vision board, I call it, ancient vision board, where the hunters would gather around, I can imagine, and look at this and get the sense of success. They're going to be successful. This was their bread and butter, so to speak, the successful hunt. So they're envisioning, they're incorporating the the universal energy of nature with a specific picture that they form themselves. That is a successful hunt. They see the animals coming toward them, but they see them coming toward them because they're tapping into the spiritual dimension, influencing the outcome of the hunt. That's the attempt. And I have related this in a more modern graphic here to the digital camera. The intuitive receiver, the part that receives universal energy or light, is the lens and the shutter. The light enters that apparatus as universal, and the reflective or the visualizing aspect of the imagination is the LCD screen. And if you watch that screen here on this screen, you'll see that it changes, and there's no limit to the choices that we can make. I happen to include a number of desert scenes from this area, which I love. But those pictures can be anything. You can point that camera at anything, and the universal light that is available comes through the lens and comes onto the LCD screen, and then we make a choice as to which composition we want, and we snap the shutter. So it's a way of combining the universal with the personal, and this is the process of the imagination. So you think of the intuitive side of your imagination as the camera's lens and shutter. Through the intuition flows the universal energy of life, power, love, and intelligence. It's light. It's like light. It has no preferences. It just is. This energy combines with the picture-forming aspect of your imagination, that's your mental viewfinder, to produce a state of consciousness that serves as the basis for your material conditions. These states of consciousness make up the unique photo gallery that you call your life. This is why people are different. This is why we express differently. People say, if God is present, how come there's so many problems? It's because we all carry different photo galleries, and it's all by personal choice. It's the universal that we are converting by personal choice into specific states of consciousness. And for the most part, we're unaware of this. So it is within the imagination that the personal and the universal are brought together to form the unique basis of your external life conditions. And that is a very lengthy and deep subject, as you can imagine. So we're just touching on it here, but this is I think, a very helpful graphic to just show how your imagination works. And so this leads to the discussion on values, and this is a very important subject. So an evolution of values, this is the final part of this this presentation, but a very important part. Unity has always emphasized the importance of meditation, and many have a difficult time with this practice. So I highly recommend reading 2 chapters on this subject, and you probably have already done this. This is a classic book, Lessons in Truth. The 2 chapters, The Secret Place of the Most High and Finding the Secret Place. The language is a bit archaic, but the ideas are just as fresh today as they ever were the day she wrote them. And so I highly recommend this, the whole book actually, but just to get a sense of that, the nearness of the presence and our ability right now to begin to tap into that. It's a great refresher, a couple of chapters to read. So if you think of your own life as a spiritual journey, as I'm sure most of you do, you've arrived at the place where you understand how a practice like meditation will benefit you in your spiritual awakening. You close your eyes with the intention of opening your mind to the radiant light of your soul. You find, however, that your mind immediately fills with trivial thoughts. It is as if you're on a journey with a specific destination and you encounter a swift river that you need to cross. That's that incessant thinking. You wade into the water, but the current is too strong, and by all appearances you can go no further. And this is the biggest complaint I hear about those who attempt to meditate is they close their eyes and their minds fill with all kinds of things. And it's just like a busy river. I can't get across that river. But now suppose there's $100 million in gold coins out on that rock. Do you think you would conclude that the river is too swift and walk away from the problem? I don't think that's too likely. And why would that be? Why would I say that? It's because most people understand the value of $100 million. We would figure out how to cross the river. We don't necessarily understand the value of meditation yet because we have not touched deeply that inner presence. But we understand the value of gold, we understand the value of money, and we would commit to getting across that river, getting at least to that rock. The truth is that you are capable of moving beyond this river of mind chatter. This is what's important to understand. That is not a barrier. There are no natural barriers between yourself and your ability to experience God. No natural barriers. That's an important phrase to grasp. There are no natural barriers. There are simply values. If your mind shoots off in some other direction, it's because you value that direction more than you value the experience of God. And it's not a negative statement toward any individual or any individual practice. It's a statement of fact that when you value the experience of God to the degree that you would understand and value the $100 million out in that river, you'll get there. You will not do it until you truly grasp the value of doing so. And that's the biggest challenge with those starting out with the meditative process, is we don't really know what we're looking for. We don't know the value of what we're looking for. So how do we reach this point? The first thing is we observe our repeating pattern of arriving and turning away, and we realize that more of the same will get you no further along. That is, we walk up to the edge of the river and we walk away. And then a couple days later, we walk up to the edge of the river again. We find it's still there. We walk away again, as if something is going to change, as if that river is going to go away. So we watch ourselves. We walk up to the edge of the river and we turn away. That's a repeating pattern. And we look at that in ourselves and we say, okay, this is what I'm doing. If you've ever had a computer glitch, for example, and you try to fix it by doing the same thing over and over again. I've done this so many times I've lost count. For some reason you think, I tried that fix and it didn't work, so I'm going to try it again. You may try it 50 times and try to make it work, and no matter how hard you try to make it work, it doesn't work. If you're having this problem in meditation, say, I don't know how to do this. So going up to the edge of the river again and walking away isn't going to produce anything. I've got to do something else. What is that something else? It's first of all acknowledging that what I'm doing is not working, but there is a way to get across. You have to realize that teachers and books present you with ideas that you already know. This is another thing. It's kind of a self-put down. If you go through all of your books and look at the highlights that you have made in your books, that this would include the Bible, you highlight the things that you already know are true. That author agrees with something you know at a very deep level. So they are presenting to you something that you already know. They can lead you to the river, but they can't take you across. So it doesn't matter how many books you read, and I'm not advocating stop reading. What I'm saying is reading another book will not get you across the river. The time has to come when you say, okay, here I am. What do I need to do to get across this river? All that remains is for you to cross that river of incessant thought. And I say that as if that's easy, but what I'm saying is that river isn't going to go away. It doesn't matter how many facts about God, about meditation, about yourself that you stuff into your head. That river is not going to go away. And so there comes a time when you begin to wade into it. You begin to take your own action. You put down the book and you start moving into this deeper realization on your own. And it comes in very small increments at first. But you begin to see a difference. Something changes in you. And you then have your first glimmer of light and you begin to pursue that. And that leads to the next. Jesus talked about this evolution of values. With one was a story of a man that came to him, a wealthy young man that wanted enlightenment, but he refused to sell his possessions and devote his energy to this. He was looking for another thing to do. What can I do to inherit eternal life, he asked. So you've got a man here, and Jesus said, well, all you have to do is go sell everything you own and then follow me. Give it to the poor and follow me. The man went away sad. He went away depressed, actually, because apparently all that he owned was where he placed his value. He said he wanted eternal life. He wanted enlightenment, but he placed more value on his possessions than he did on the question he was asking Jesus, how do I get eternal life? Jesus said, let go of everything you think is true. Another story, and this is a parable that he told, is the buried treasure. The man happened upon a treasure. He recognized its value, and he gladly sold all that he had to buy that field. And you see the difference. One's being asked to let go of things that they consider define them. The value of their possessions is their most important possession. They place their highest value on what they have, not on what they are at the deepest level. Whereas the man that stumbles upon this buried treasure recognizes its value immediately, and nobody has to tell him, go sell everything you own. He sees the value of that treasure. And I like to remind people that the treasure that he finds is not a treasure to be developed. It's a treasure that's already complete. That's why he recognizes it. It's like a big chest of gold or something that's already finished. It's not a job opportunity that he has to develop, or not a investment opportunity or anything like that. He recognizes the completed value, the value of this completed treasure. And that's what happens to us as we make that breakthrough, as we begin to wade into that river and have our first-hand experience. Then we begin to understand the real value of that, and we have no problem selling everything we own. And what is that? It's all of our preconceptions, all the false beliefs, and the self-image that we carry, most of us carry. And I would say the self-image of an evolving soul is one of the first things we need to sell. We gladly sell because we tap into that completeness, that wholeness. Just like the man that found the buried treasure, we see the value of this, and we gladly move into this process of waking up to it, selling everything that we own, all of our preconceptions, so that we can move into this deeper awareness. When we understand the value of a first-hand experience with God, and we don't understand it until we begin to have it. You can't read about it and get it. You have to start experiencing it. But when we understand the value of a first-hand experience with God, we will enjoy what it takes to have it. And that's Native Soul in a nutshell.
Thank you, Doug. We are going to now move to the question and answer portion of this webinar, and I will introduce my colleague Angie Olson, and she will take us through questions that have been submitted, and I believe we do have some questions that you have all been typing in during the webinar. Angie?
Yes. Thank you, Mary. Okay, our first question that came in is, can one reach the full level of satisfaction, the native soul, without having had a near-death experience?
I hope so. I consider that research a window, a very important window. But yes, of course, if the native soul is complete if it's there, then no, we don't have to go through the trauma and the expense of a near-death experience. I know many people that have done that, not by choice. I wouldn't do it by choice. But what it shows us is what we're looking for is already there. And that's all I'm saying with this. And I find it very inspiring, actually. But no, you do not have to have a near-death experience.
Okay. Another question was really on that same topic. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research that you did on near-death experiences? Have you had one yourself, which I think you just answered that, and kind of getting to why you wrote this book?
The experience I had, I would call it an experience of cosmic consciousness. And I had this in my early 20s, maybe late teens, where my mind was suddenly opened to the absolute love and life and light and the warmth of this presence that was very real. It was the most real experience I've ever had in my life. And it's the motivation behind my entering the ministry. If I had not had that experience and known that God is something more than a theory, I don't think I could have done this. I don't think I would do it with the enthusiasm that I do it with. Because I know that what we're talking about, when we say God, when we say there is a deeper dimension, it is real, it is present, and we don't have to know or learn one more thing to gain its love and acceptance so that it will give itself to us. We simply have to open our minds to what is. So when I got into the near-death research, and I've had several people come forward over the years and tell me about this, and that started getting my attention. I read Raymond Moody's book like everybody in the 80s, I think, and found it very fascinating. But what I really relate to is that level of love and wholeness that people try to describe and cannot find words for is a thing I understand because I've touched it myself. But it was not a near-death experience. It was anything but. I was not anywhere near death, not physically challenged at all. I was very frustrated at that time, and my mind just opened. But there are no prerequisites for this. And that's what the near-death research tells me, is that people come from all backgrounds, as I suggested earlier, and they have this incredible experience. They don't have to earn it. It's already there. They're simply uncovering what is already there, and that's what we need to get across.
Okay. Our next question came in actually through Goodreads, and the writer wrote, "One of my areas of concern is transcending negative experiences and judgments." And she's looking for advice in terms of how to transcend negative experiences.
You probably will never transcend negative experiences, but you will transcend how you react to them, and that's one of the chapters in the book, actually. If you take a person like Jesus, for example, who we consider highly evolved, highly illumined, whatever you want to call it, we look at him as our way shower, our example. Probably not a day passed in his life where he was not challenged. The story tells us from the day of his birth, he was threatened. His life was threatened, and that went all through his life up until he was actually put to death by his enemies. So it's not a matter of overcoming what happens to us in the three-dimensional world as much as it is tapping into that deeper reservoir. And see, I think one of the problems with trying to fix ourselves is that we don't know what we ought to be. And that's what we're doing wrong. When we open ourselves through meditation to this deeper level, and it begins to reveal itself, as Jesus said, they shall all be taught by God. This is literally true. That there's this dimension in us that teaches us, we're trying to overcome all of our inadequacies. But this part of us doesn't even care about that. It absolutely does not acknowledge it. And one of the interesting stories I was reading that is in connection with this was a story about a mafia hitman who had literally killed many people, had done, the worst things we can imagine. And he himself was shot 3 times in the chest and had a near-death experience. And it was such a profound experience for him. And see, here you have a person that we would consider evil or very bad. I mean, no matter how you cut it. But even that person had access to this beauty, this deeper love, and this reality. And it made such a profound impact on him. He didn't have to try to overcome his limitations after that. He became a social worker just by virtue of the impact of seeing himself as he is for the first time. And that's the quickest way to change characteristics, behaviors in ourselves we don't like. It's direct exposure to that deeper level, and the rest takes care of itself. If you're trying to make yourself a better person, you might as well hang it up, because it's really not going to work. You don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. But something in us does, and that's the attitude that we need to have, that something knows how to guide us into that greater way of expressing what is already complete.
Okay. Our next question: if our consciousness or soul survives death, do you think the dead speak to us?
Yeah, they probably do, but should we be interested in what they have to say? I think that's the biggest question. We probably didn't listen to them when they were alive, so why would we want to listen to them when they're dead? That's, that's why do we think they're so wise? Why would we think they're so wise? They probably are wise, but does that wisdom have anything to do with what we're going through right now? People can get off on this track. The greatest wisdom available to any individual is within themselves. So why would you want to listen to a dead person? Why would you want to listen to even a live person, someone like me even? What I'm suggesting is don't listen to me, don't listen to anyone else. Learn to listen to yourself. Be true to yourself. That's a very, very important thing, and it's such a cliche to us that we don't get it. But that treasure, that completed treasure, is within every one of us. So yes, I think all of these things happen. There's some incredible stories of people who see relatives and people that have gone on, and people pass on messages and so forth. And if that happens, it's fine. I don't discount it, but I don't seek it out. And I don't recommend seeking it out, because why go to another person, embodied or disembodied, when you can go directly to God?
Okay. Our next question submitted this evening was: why do we forget so easily our spiritual nature that many of us may have encountered early on in life and know to be a very true reality, if only fleeting?
It's because we have built a census-based identity. That is, we have defined ourselves by what we see, hear, what we touch, information that comes in through the senses. We have declared ourselves a specific gender, which we are expressing through a body with a specific gender, a social class, experiences, education. We define ourselves by what we have rather than by what we are at the deepest level, and we confuse that. That's where the personality takes on the negative. That's where we define it as negative. What comes in through the senses is not true of what we are. That's where the whole idea of soul evolution comes from. We feel incomplete because we're operating just on this sensual basis, the sensus-based identity. We declare ourselves incomplete, so I've got to read 500,000 more books before I start achieving completeness, and even that's not enough, so I have to reincarnate 500 more times so that my soul will evolve. We have to stop telling ourselves this, and we have to start telling ourselves, I am now complete, and that completeness is now coming forth. But we're all in that boat of forgetting. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm in any different place than anyone else. I totally understand that struggle completely, because we take on this identity, and that's the thing we're overcoming. But as I said earlier, there are no natural barriers, and that would include this false sense of self. It is not a natural barrier. That is, it is a thing that can be let go of. It is a possession, a thing that we may value now because we have not touched the deeper level. And that's what this is all about. When we touch that deeper level, it changes our value system and we begin to make new choices.
Okay. The next comment and question says, Mr. Bottorff, you've demonstrated significant expertise in your works to date. What questions would best serve us here and now to better profit from your writings and this book? Essentially, what questions should readers be asking themselves while reading your book or listening to the webinar to most benefit and most profit?
I think the biggest shift in awareness that anyone can make is moving from I'm an evolving entity to I'm a complete entity. I'm a complete soul now. That sounds, goes against much of what we have come to believe. But I think that we have to start telling ourselves this. We have to start making it part of our vocabulary, part of our mental chatter, that I am a whole being. You know, that's the whole basis of the unity approach to prayer, say for healing, is we acknowledge the wholeness that exists behind the appearance of disease. And so what we do is we lay hold of that wholeness and we affirm from that wholeness what is true of us at the deepest level. As I say in my book, the native soul has never been sick a day in its eternal life. It's impossible. So there's a part of you that is whole. It's like the man by the pool of Bethesda, laid there for 38 years as an invalid. Jesus came up to him and said something like, do you want to be healed? And the man started giving all the excuses as to why. He's saying, my soul's not evolved. I have so long, I'm so far away from knowing the truth and the things we tell ourselves. Well, Jesus had a different opinion. He said, take up your pallet and walk. And that wholeness, that completed soul of that individual was present always through that entire 38 years. But the man was telling himself a different story. He was identifying, his values were placed on what he didn't like, didn't want to experience, rather than what he did want to experience. And Jesus, apparently in that story, changed that man's thinking in an instant. And that's exactly what can happen to any of us.
Okay. Will our search for soulfulness only be answered when one makes their final transition, or can we find it here and now?
Repeat that question, please.
Will our search for, quote, soulfulness only be answered when one makes their final transition, or can we find it here and now?
Well, if we can't find it here and now, what's the point? That the whole traditional Christian approach is you get it when you die. That's when we attain oneness. That's when we enter the kingdom if we're lucky. That's the whole point. Well, unity teaches omnipresence. God is everywhere present equally at the same time, and that means right here, right now. So why can't we experience that now? Are there some natural barriers between our awareness and that presence? And the answer is no, there are no natural barriers. It would make no sense at all to step on this planet and have this experience thinking that we're not going to get happy or connected till we die. What would be the point? And somebody will say, well, the point is to evolve my soul. Well, I think that's false. I think it makes no sense to me whatsoever. I think I'm here because I want to be. I think everyone is here because we want to be. We've made a choice to express on this level for some reason. And it is important for us to engage this life fully right here, right now. This is the only time we have. You can't be there. You can't be anywhere but here.
We have one final question. You say that meditation is one way to increase awareness of your native soul. Are there other tools available?
Well, people say there are, and I would say that meditation is probably the most conventional, probably the easiest way. You can step in front of a garbage truck, I guess, if you want to go that route and have a near-death experience. It's a little risky. You may not come back. Meditation is a free approach to the infinite. And yes, there's a learning curve. Yes, there's a lot of preconceptions that we have that seem to block our ability to do that. But for example, the experience I had, I wasn't meditating when I had it. I was very angry at God because I was all day long was thinking, why is this so hard? Why is it so difficult to get a realization when it's supposed to be so natural? And I was not in a good mood, not in a good attitude. I sat on the edge of my bed getting ready for bed, and my mind just suddenly opened. It was a very unexpected experience. So I wasn't sitting, with my back against the wall, with my legs crossed, meditating on anything. It's like Paul on the road to Damascus. Suddenly he had a cosmic consciousness, a cosmic awareness. And he was, that was like the last thing on his mind. So it can come in any way. But what meditation does, it prepares us. It opens our faith faculty to that deeper dimension. And then let the sun break through those clouds in whatever way it does. But the key here is give up all your preconceptions. Sell your possessions. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but meditation does get your mind pointed in the right direction. It's like turning a telescope to the stars rather than to the ground. You got it in the right direction, pretty soon you're going to see something pretty cool.